Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today. My name is Danny Rahim, as very kindly introduced. I'm a mental health ambassador, speaker, also an actor. I'll share a little bit about my story and my journey. So for the last 7, 8 years, after some extensive study, I've been going and delivering lots of mental health training, and not just to men, but schools, universities, everywhere that obviously mental health and mental ill health affects us all. So I have a very personal access point to mental well-being and my own lived experience, the experience of my mum, my sisters, which I'll share with you as we go on this journey together. So the idea of today is to give you a little bit, I guess, of my personal story, but also the techniques and skills that I learned over years when essentially I had a mental breakdown. And after that came all the learning and the personal development and trying to understand why I had got into this position. And thus I stand here before you all today, sharing my experience and hoping to impart some of that knowledge for you so that hopefully if you, family members, anyone is going through a similar experience, you have some techniques and tools to take away with you. So, how are you today? How are you today? Answer it for yourselves, answer it to your mate, write it down on a piece of paper. How are you feeling today as we arrive here? Feel free to share with the person next to you. How are you feeling? We've got to keep it open. This is where it all begins today. So, how are you feeling? Tell the person to your left or right. If you don't want to speak to them, write it on a piece of paper in front of you. How are you feeling today? How are you feeling this morning? Yeah? Good. It's nice to talk, isn't it? Look, you turn, you smile, you say how you're feeling. Look at everybody. The room is lifted already. So it's such simple things. How often do we ask people how we're feeling and we don't really wait for the response? It's a passing, it's a pleasantry. How you doing, mate? Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, you? Yeah, good, thanks. And then it's gone. You're not really asking the question. You're not really waiting for the response. How many of you during that exercise said good? Yeah? Good, good, good. Yeah? It's a very common, we do it as a pleasantry, but what happens when we ask ourselves how we're really feeling? And sometimes that is the tough question. Sometimes that was the tough question to ask myself, but actually you get the truth of how you're really feeling and therefore the ability to act on it. We'll come back to how you're feeling today a little bit further into the session. So what we're going to cover today, okay, so we've got the introduction from myself, Danny Rahim, as I mentioned. We're going to cover some statistics. Now, some of the statistics that you'll hear, you may have heard before. It takes a while for statistics to be measured, to come through. So you might find that some of these stats are from 2020, for example, but you will get a rough idea of what's going on in society and probably how it's evolved post-pandemic as well. Yeah. Emotional intelligence and emotional literacy, the difference between the two, what are they? Why it is important, why I felt it was important for me to try and understand the two. How are we going to develop our knowledge if we don't understand these very key concepts? Health versus wealth. Now, this was something that myself, when I was growing up, because of how I grew up in a very working class environment, so money was very important for me. And for survival, it is for all of us. But actually, I think the weight that I put on money and its value and how important it was actually got me lost and moving away from my own well-being because I was just perpetually chasing money, the next thing, because I wanted safety, I wanted security. But now I realize, actually, there is a certain amount that we need to survive. But actually anything beyond that, what is that? Is that excess? And actually, is my mental well-being worth that excess that I may gain in the financial space? Not really. So then we will look at a couple of concepts and a couple of practitioners that I looked at that I found very useful. Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers. These are not concepts that you're going to take away from here and you can have weak courses on these things. But for me, what it was, they were interesting practitioners that I really felt I could understand and visually I could access a greater understanding of my well-being. So I'll introduce you to a couple of concepts, take it or leave it. You might decide to go and do a little bit of research yourselves after this. You might decide, actually, that doesn't interest me whatsoever, but that will be down to you. The self-care worksheet, I wasn't quite sure on the size of the group, but we'll keep that as a bit more of an open discussion. And I guess the rest is pretty self-explanatory. So it'll be a little bit of my journey, some theory, some techniques, and then we'll cover a Q&A at the end. And the whole session will last about 50 minutes to an hour, depending on how interactive you chaps make it and what questions you have. So me, how did I end up here? So as I mentioned, my name is Danny Rahim. I grew up in West London in a place called Acton. Some of you may know it, it's not too far from here. I grew up in a very working class environment. I had mum, dad, we didn't have a lot of money. We lived in a council property and that's where we spent most of our lives in Acton. So we've got mum here, Malika. So mum's side of the family, Pakistani Muslim. Dad's side of the family, Irish Catholic. So already in the 80s, when these two are getting together, that caused issues in itself. Religion played a big part, and actually both their independent, or my respective families, they were quite religious. So when they got together, they were almost left by their families because they said, you know, you're going, particularly for mum, a young Pakistani woman. My grandma wears a headscarf. It's very traditional. Mum was none of those things. She was born here. She grew up here. She was kind of, I guess, westernized in some ways. So she didn't follow all the tradition. That caused conflict in itself later down the line. They pursued love. And that's one of the things I'm so proud of with them is they chose love rather than religion, I guess, in some ways. They were left by their families for a little while. But eventually the families, particularly when I was born, came back round and said, hey, listen, we've got to go beyond this because we're going to lose contact with our grandchild and grandchildren, so on and so forth. So here's me, spent a lot of time in Ireland as a little whippersnapper. You know, mum did very, very well. Mum, I guess you could say in many respects, she was happy, she was healthy, she had a normal job, she worked for Notting Hill Housing Group. So although we all have mental health and mental ill health at times, there was nothing explicitly exhibited by mum at this point. She was what I would describe just a fairly normal, loving mum. Went to work, came back, made food. You know, that was our routine. So by this point, everything was fairly, I guess, normal. But I'm apprehensive to use that term normal because what is normal? Normal is different for everybody, right? This is my grandma, again. So they had their own quabbles because of religion, etc. But it was a fairly loving environment. This is my youngest sister, Sky. So this is when we grew up in Scott Court in West London as well. Again, just we had the things that we needed. Mum worked hard, Dad worked hard. We had the things that we needed. We by no means had everything. If I wanted a pair of roller skates for Christmas, I had to ask the year before. It was one of those kind of environments. Whereas now, think of how quickly we get things when we need them. We need a new phone, we just go and get it. Everything is so fast now, right? Those times it wasn't like that. Particularly for me, it wasn't like that. You had to request it, and you had to be good for a year for you to get these presents. So this was me last year of primary school. So I went to Don't Walk Primary School in Acton, centre of attention. By this point, Mum and Dad's relationship started to fall apart a little bit. Dad was really struggling with work. He was a carpenter. He was going from building site to building site, really struggling to hold down jobs. He started drinking, and this caused a lot of conflict in the house, a lot of arguments. And unfortunately, at this point, we started to see some cracks, and there was a lot of domestic abuse, domestic violence towards Mum. I then moved into high school, first year at Chiswick, and there's a lot going on at home now. Social services are now involved with me at this point, but still kept that smiley face, still kept that happy centre of attention, that whole persona, because that was me. And actually, it was easier to be outward with everyone else than it was to be talking about the stuff that was going on at home and the arguments and the shouting and the screaming and the swearing. There was a lot going on. It was quite traumatic, actually, but at the time, I didn't realise any of that. So we cut through a whole journey. We cut through a whole period where it's about 3 or 4 years at Chiswick High School. And I think there are not a lot of pictures around this time because actually it wasn't a lot of happy memories. There was a lot of arguments. There was a lot of fighting. Mum, unfortunately, she was 8 months pregnant. This was quite some time before. And she had a car crash and she lost her baby. So she was then diagnosed with PTSD, bipolar disorder. It's had many names throughout the years, but she wasn't very well. She was sectioned a few times. She had a number of attempts on her own life. And yeah, it was quite a problematic time because I was just trying to stay focused. I always had this mindset that don't complain about what's going on with you, Danny, because there's always someone else worse than you. There's always someone in the world that doesn't even have food at the moment. There's people that don't have money. So actually what I did is I suppressed my feelings and I suppressed my emotions because I didn't want to be a complainer. This notion of man up, be a man, get on with it, crack on. You know, they were certainly things that were being said to me at the time, just get on with it. And so I didn't really address any of the emotional stuff. I just kept my head focused and kept trying to move forward. I graduate. I end up, these are two of my best friends, Joe and Sean. They're in here because they were at the start of my journey and at the end of my journey. They're still my good friends now. But they were distraction for me. They were an easy way, Freshers Week at university. For those of you that have been to university, you'll know Freshers is essentially where you go out and you just drink for a week. It's where you're supposed to be socializing, but you just basically go out and party for 2 weeks. You make your friends, you form your groups. A lot of people hadn't come from big cities, they'd come from all over the place. So their first experience going to bars and clubs and this. So it was a nice bonding experience, but again, it's distraction. You're now drinking, and you're drinking, now that I realize it, far too excessively than what you should be doing. But that's just university experience, or it was for me at the time. So we get through those 3 years, and I graduate, BA honours in acting. Interestingly, when in my last years at school, I remember the teacher saying to me, Danny, in order to be in the football team, you've got to do something out of your comfort zone. So I was like, what's that going to be then? I'll do something, I want to get back in the football team. He said, you can go, I don't know, go to the art class, you can go to audition for the drama, the play, whatever it might be. So I did. I thought, go and audition for the school play. They'll make me tree number 3. I'll tick that off, that's done. I go on, I say one line, I'm back in the football team. But they didn't, they made me the main part in the school play. And that is where I found for myself, I was able to connect a little bit more emotionally, play another character. So I was playing characters that were not myself, and therefore I could express emotion through other things. So it wasn't me expressing that emotion, I was acting. And that was a really interesting concept for me, which I came to learn later was my way, almost like an escapism for me. So I graduate. I'm very, very lucky. Things start going really well for me. I'll start on this and then I'll come back. I got an agent. I got a very good agent when I left school. On paper, things were going really, really well for me. If you would ask any of my peers, they would have said to you, you know, who's doing the best in the year? It's Danny. This is EastEnders. Some of you may know it, some of you may not, but a very popular British soap. So things were going well, but I was just distracted. I hadn't processed any of the stuff that was going on with Mum. I hadn't processed any of the stuff that was going on for myself. I hadn't even looked at it. I hadn't even addressed it because why would I? I'm on telly. I'm about to do this. I'm flying out to here to do this show, this show, this show, this show, this show. And what unfortunately happened, and they say bad things come in threes, and that's what happened. I had a very unfortunate sequence of events. So Dad very unexpectedly passed away. He was only young. But he had a blood clot in his leg. The blood clot grew. His whole leg sort of ended up purple, and he went into a coma. And essentially, the doctors said, we've got 2 choices. We either prescribe a really strong course of antibiotics that we don't think he'll make it through because basically how much he's been drinking, his liver's weak, or we amputate his leg. And so my uncle and my granddad were called in, and they made the decision to try the antibiotics. And unfortunately, they didn't work, and my dad passed away very unexpectedly a couple of days later. So that was one thing that happened. I'm on the way back. So I'm on my way to my first job with the BBC. I'm on a little scooter. I'm riding my little Vespa over there, and something happens with the chain, the bike tips. I end up falling off my scooter, breaking my foot. So I'm then at home. Dad's passed away. Mum's in a really bad place at the moment because of what's gone on with Dad, but also what's gone on with herself. But it was the first moment that I had to sit with myself and my feelings and my thoughts, because prior to that, I'm flying off here, I'm doing this TV show, I'm doing that. I wasn't really sitting and acknowledging what I was really truly experiencing. I was distracting myself constantly. And when I broke my foot was the first time I had to actually just sit there and reflect on what had happened. I'm sat in this flat, got a cast on my foot, I can't go out, I'm on crutches to get to shops. And I just start reflecting on everything that's happening. And I get really depressed, actually, is what starts to happen there. You know, I've got all this stuff around me, I've got all these material things, but I'm deeply unhappy inside. And that was a little bit to do with feeling like I had missed out on an opportunity of relationship with my father, my broken foot, of course, the physical pain of that comes with it. So, Mum, not in a good place, she goes missing. You can see, you know, this is after a number of years, you can see by the picture how mental illness has kind of taken its toll on her physically. And this was on Twitter. My sister sent me this, that my mum had just gone missing. So obviously now I've got a broken foot, mum's got missing, dad's passed away. You know, it's getting a lot. It's getting a lot, really. So then what happens is a TV show comes up. I get an offer of this. So again, the ups. It's like, brilliant. You get this offer to come in. So my life is just going like this. And every single time I get an up, a down happens. Every time I get an up, and it's just throwing me. And what I'm not doing is taking that step back and trying to process emotionally. All I'm doing is distracting. This was my broken foot again. So I've got TV show, I've got all this stuff happening. So we're now in 2012. Cast comes off. My mates all ring me up and they say, Danny, come out. Listen, you got the cast off. You haven't been out with us. Come for some drinks. We're going out here. We're going out here. We're doing this. We're doing this. I also had a girlfriend at the time. And while this had happened, I didn't want to take on any help from anyone. I was too proud. I felt I didn't want to be weak. I'd been the breadwinner for my two sisters and my family. Like, I'd been that paternal strong figure. And it was like, I felt quite weak. I didn't want help from other people. I felt quite difficult to take that help from other people. So anyway, pushed my girlfriend away. We broke up. So now I'm alone. And I'm processing this by myself, and I'm not equipped to process this stuff by myself because I don't even know what it is. I don't even know how to describe it really at the time. So what happens? My friends invite me out. I go out in Clapham for some drinks, and my friend, I see a message on his phone that says, hey, please don't tell Danny I'm dating other people. I don't want him to be upset. Now, I was in the mindset that I would get myself sorted and I'd get back with my ex-girlfriend. To then hear that she was dating other people, it just broke me, it crushed me. So I got up, I smiled at everyone, I said, I'm gonna call it a night. And I walked out and I left the bar, and I walked around the corner and I attempted to take my own life, basically. Totally unpredicted, no one would have known what was going on. I didn't anticipate it, but it was that triggering event that was just too much. I was like, I need this pain to stop. I cannot do this anymore. It's like every time something knocks me down, I try my best to pick myself back up. There's something more, something more, something more. And in the end, there was nothing left. There was nothing left. And I think the alcohol clearly didn't help either. You know, alcohol at the time was a thing where your mates would say at the end of the working shift, come and have a drink. And actually, if I was really stressed or whatever was going on, I'd say, yeah, let's go and have a beer, let's go and have a beer. It was always something that was used to kind of suppress or pacify or distract. Now I have a very different relationship with alcohol. I don't go for a drink with anyone unless I'm in a good space, unless I'm happy. I will go for a drink to celebrate, to enjoy, but never to quash feelings and emotion, because I know that the next day you wake up, it's even worse anyway. Some of you may have experienced that yourselves. So I then come back from all of this, and my friend says to me, I took time actually, I took a lot of time to understand myself, what had happened. I read a lot, I studied, and what I realized was I needed a little bit of purpose. The acting wasn't giving me security and stability. The acting for me was very unpredictable. Your agent would call you up, an audition would come in, you do your best audition, and then you never hear anything again. Imagine going for a job interview 3 times a week. You work your butt off to get that audition or to get that job, and you don't hear anything. Particularly when you're not feeling great. It grates you. So my friend said, listen, I work for this recruitment company. Come in, get stuck in. You know, it'll be a good distraction for you for a bit. Let's get you refocused. Let's get you into a little bit of a routine. So that's what I did. I went and joined this company, Parallel Consulting, just based in Putney. Had a really good time, met a lot of people. This is some leaderboards here, but I was the first person to hit the top performance thing in 6 months. And the reason why that was, I was the first person in. I was the last person out. It was distraction for me because I knew at home, I'd be thinking, I'd be going through thoughts again. So I was like, I'm just going to go into work. And so I started to understand this concept of actually how overworking can be unhealthy. And actually, it can just be a way of distracting. And that's exactly what I was doing. The managers loved me because I was in before all of them. And like I say, I left after everyone. My performance figures were great, but I wasn't processing anything that was going on in here, or here, actually. So I'm on all the winners' trips. We're going here. It's fun. It's drinks. When in these kind of high-performance sales roles, If you're making the business money, you're getting sport, you're getting taken everywhere, suits are turning up, new shoes are turning up, here's a new watch, like all of the stuff, you know. But material things, I realized that I have less attachment and association with those, but that came later. So although we're on these trips, these are some of my best buddies from work, they're still some of my good friends. And the reason I put them all up is because all of them, despite being the highest performers in the company, all had breakdowns at some point post this picture. So where you've got the highest performers earning the money, bought their own flats, done whatever, but actually still not functioning properly, not well, not healthy, not understanding themselves. So, and I could see for myself, I was not getting in a good place again. I wasn't eating properly. I wasn't looking after myself. We were drinking at night, you know, we were going for drinks after work, party, overworking, having a kebab on the way home. You know, but doing that a lot is not good for you at all. But I took some time, I took a step back, and something happened despite all of that experience that was very, very positive for me, and is one of the reasons I'm here sharing this with you all today. I decided I needed a change. A change had to happen because I was on that slope again, and I could feel myself on that slope again. And I was like, I know where this slope ends up, so I'm not going to do that. I started to get into my fitness. I started to eat properly. I started to take on a few habits, let's say, that were a lot more positive for my well-being that I will share with you shortly. I got fit. I spent a lot of time. This is one of my best friends. He was my trainer, one of my good buddies now. But an opportunity came. So I was still doing recruitment at this point. But an opportunity came, an acting opportunity. I got a call from my agent. He said, listen, Death in Paradise, ironically, was a show that a lot of people had been trying to get on for a while. I got a call from my agent to say, hey, they want you in Guadeloupe, French Caribbean, on Sunday for 2 weeks. Are you up for it? And I was like, absolutely. This is what I needed. So I flew out and I got back into the acting. And so I'm out there, but I hadn't forgotten the lessons of everything that had happened. So I went, and I studied, and I learned, and I decided, okay, how can I use my acting as a platform? Not the notoriety, because I'm not famous by any stretch of the imagination, but I have enough credits and enough things that I've done where I can be an ambassador, and I can go to events, and I can speak as an actor, and I can share things with you. So how can I use that platform to deliver the mental health awareness stuff that I really care about? And this is how this all began. So lots and lots of events spoken to now, thousands and thousands of people, because I really care about this stuff. And I guess for me, this is the part that satisfies my soul. You know, acting is there, the creative, the emotional outlet, whatever we want to call it. But now I'm able to identify where these things all have their place in my life. And for me, coming and speaking and sharing with you all, this makes me happy. It gives me purpose. And it also, when I'm now able to go back with Mum, who's in a much better place now, I'm able to say, hey, you know, everything that we went through was worth it in some way, because now I'm able to share this with people and help them with their mental health, their mental well-being. And so it makes me incredibly proud and grateful to be here. So a few stats. Now, you know, this 1 in 4 of us, so 1 in 4 adults will struggle or are struggling with their mental health at any given point. Okay, so what does that equate to in our room, on our tables? You know, if you look left and right. Personally, this was pre-pandemic, so I would say that's easily 3 in 4 people now have experienced the will. You think of your extended family, think of your household. We're all struggling in some way, or we've all struggled in some way. How did we manage that? How did we get through? Are we still experiencing some stuff that we're trying to get through? The whole point of this is we've got to try and remove the stigma, and we've got to try and make this conversation a little bit more open and connect with each other and ask each other those questions. How are you doing? But really ask those questions and really be ready for the responses. Only then do we start the momentum, start that movement for looking after each other's well-being. Some more stats here. I mean, not really rocket science, right? But everyone's mental health got worse during the pandemic. I'm sure you saw that yourselves in your roles, potentially at home. Finding that balance with work and home and your own well-being, very tough for a lot of people. So, how do you really feel today? Okay, before we do that, I'm just going to do something. I'm going to take you through a few little things that I learned on emotional intelligence and emotional literacy. Does anyone have any idea what emotional intelligence is? Yeah? Have a guess. What do you think it means? Share if you know emotional intelligence. You nodded. You're shy now. That's fine. Emotional intelligence and emotional literacy, okay? Emotional intelligence, when someone walks in a room or someone comes in and we get that feeling, we say, something's not quite right with them today, or I know they're not feeling great. It's that awareness, it's that understanding. The literacy is the ability to describe that. When I say to you, how are you doing? You say, good. How can we expand that language? How can we expand that so we can more fully describe how we're feeling at any one given time? So, there's something here called the mood meter. It might be a little bit small for you. Those watching this after, you should have a better way to see it on the picture. But Mark Brackett has this thing called the mood meter. I absolutely love this. Feel free to Google it yourselves, write it down. This is really cool. I use this with my niece a lot. She's 12. And it describes our moods and our feeling in different quadrants. So you've got warmer feelings, you've got the hot in the top left quadrant, which are angry, furious, frustrated. Then what we've got are the kind of the warmer feelings on the top right, where we've got cheerful, excited, happy, proud, playful. And then we've got the bottom left, which are cool feelings. So we've got some here, we've got lonely, alienated, disgusted. I don't think you'll be able to all see this so fully, but what I tend to do when we're running these sessions is then go, okay, how can we take one of these words and describe how we're feeling, but more fully? So where we said initially, I'm feeling good. Someone said, I think the chap at the back said, I'm feeling good. What does good mean? So what's making us feel good? I'm feeling excited. I'm feeling elated because I took my daughter to school this morning and that made me feel really enriched. You know, how do we increase that vocabulary a little bit? So when someone says, how you doing? Number one, we stay there and we wait for the response. So we actually fully ask the question and we fully wait for the response. But then if we make it a little bit more fuller, then that response gives us a much better picture of how that individual's doing. So it's important to create the space to listen for the individuals, but also to make sure that we're responding authentically. I think for me, I can talk about my own experience. When people ask me how I was doing, I didn't want to say, actually, Mum did this last night and was in hospital till 3 in the morning. So I didn't want to burden people with all of that was going on. However, it's okay to say, listen, I'm not feeling great this morning, or I had a really rough night's sleep last night, just had a lot going on with my mum. We're all generally quite empathic individuals, and we want to support and we want to help each other. When you see kids and they're bored, and they always want to help each other. So what happens in time that stops us wanting to help and support each other? What happens as we evolve, as we grow into adults? Is it that man up? Is it those conversations like that say, hey, don't complain about anything, just get on with it? That can be a lot to do with socioeconomic situations, can do with culture, religion. There can be a whole bunch of factors. But if we can bring that back to the very initial thing of saying, how you doing? How you doing this morning, mate? Really ask the question and wait for the person to come back and say, do you know what? I'm not actually feeling that great this morning. And then move forward from that. Puts us in a much better position. And then we're able to support each other a lot better. So again, just loose concepts. Robert Plutchik, he has a wheel of emotion. He described this flower that you see, the core, the ones in the center, we've got rage, loathing, grief, amazement. But what happens if we move out slightly from those concepts? When we say we're angry, what does that actually mean? Is that anger because we're frustrated? Is it because we're sad? How can we better describe how we're feeling in those situations? So again, increasing our emotional literacy or emotional vocabulary. Emotional intelligence, the ability to perceive, control, and evaluate our emotions. So this is just a little visual here, to help differentiate. So that feeling where we can feel physically cold. So I can feel cold because I'm sure it's cold outside. It's a cold day. But what about feeling cold inside? So I feel quite cold. I feel withdrawn. Noticing the two differences there. Does that make sense? To feel cold emotionally, but to feel cold physically. They're two different, but we would just say I'm feeling cold. So again, starting to just think of it, starting to look a little bit more into it, a little bit more broadly. The cognitive behavioral triangle, this was really quite insightful for me. How you speak about yourself and to yourself, what does that encourage? There's something called beware of ants here, so automatic negative thoughts. So how often when someone says to you, oh, do you think you could run 100 meters? You say, oh, no, I couldn't do that. But sometimes we do it in this self-deprecating manner because we're trying to be modest, maybe. We're trying to Not say, actually, yeah, of course I could run that. But actually, how you prime your brain is what will come into play. And actually, I do a lot of work with athletes. And the top % of athletes, at that point, it's not how fast you can run, it's mindset. The top 1 to 3% is your mindset. And think about this, if you're breaking a record, a world record, no one's done that before. So actually, you're setting a task that no one has ever done before. So what mindset must you be in? You've got to say to yourself, I can absolutely do that. Jump 8 meters, I can jump 8.2. Yes, I can do that. And it has a really, really big impact. What you say to your brain, what you tell yourself, into what your actions will be. And that's what this circle is. So how we prime our brain, our thoughts, will then lend themselves to how we emotionally engage with them and what our behavior will be around that event. Yeah, and that just, it's a continual cycle. Does that make sense? Yeah, so really important how we prime our brains and how we talk to ourselves. These are concepts I would never, ever have spoken about before. I never have understood. When someone says love yourself, I mean, what do you mean love yourself? That's what I used to be like. What does love yourself mean? Be kind to yourself. How do you be kind to yourself? Do you hug yourself? I didn't quite really kind of understand any of this stuff. But now I absolutely understand it. If you don't put yourself first, who else is going to put you first? Who cares about you the most? You. Who is your biggest ambassador? Who is your biggest champion? You. Who is your best friend? Should be you. And I never understood these concepts. Now I do. Okay, and behavioral change, just again, think, do, and feel. Sometimes this can be a little bit confusing, but this is a nice video. You know, if you know something's going to be good for you, or you have something that makes you feel good, then try and apply that into your day-to-day, whether it's walk, whatever your self-care techniques are, the things that you do. Try and include that into your day-to-day. So, what is health? I'll read it to you. It might be a little bit small. Health is a state of physical, mental, and social well-being. Mark that one. That's an interesting one. In which disease and infirmity are absent. That's the World Health Organization's description. So social well-being, that was not a concept that I was ever familiar with. What's social well-being? Does that mean my friends down the pub? What is that? Social networks? What is that? Connectivity. There's a chap called Johann Hari. Some of you may have heard of him. He wrote a book called Lost Connection. He attributes depression just down to loneliness. He said it is the core component why people get depressed, is because they're lonely, they're disconnected. And actually some of those communities around the world that maybe don't have food or don't have all the very basic things that we need to survive, they're all so happy because they have such strong communities, they have purpose. And that was a really interesting concept for me. So what is wealth? What does wealth mean to you? I know what it meant to me. Wealth meant, do you have the car? Do you have the house? Do you have the material? Was what wealth meant to me. So this is the Oxford Dictionary, an abundance of valuable possessions or money. But do you know what the etymology is? Etymology meaning the root of the word. Well, health. So if you were healthy, you had good health, you were seen as wealthy. Isn't that interesting? So over years, we've changed that to be about an abundance of valuable possessions, not to do with ourselves. Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. Again, I really needed visuals when I was trying to understand. So Abraham Maslow thought that you would never get to being self-actualized, fulfilling your purpose, if you didn't sort out the foundations and the building blocks. So we have the physiological needs at the bottom. So that's air, water, food, shelter, the basic things we need to survive. Then we have our safety needs, then we have love and belonging, then we have esteem. And the whole point is, if you build that pyramid and you get to the top, you'll be able to self-actualize. And self-actualize is living your purpose, being happy, being content in yourself. And I really like this as a visual myself. And I remind myself, every time I feel a little bit lost or I feel a bit lonely, I go back and I go, right, Danny, you've got your basic needs being met. You know, you've got a roof over your head, you've got food, you've got people that you can talk to. And I just remind myself that I have the basics. And that's sometimes just a good reminder when we feel a little bit lost or overwhelmed with work or stressed or anxious or depressed. Actually, I like the visuals. They really work well for me. So Carl Rogers, one of the things that I did is I took on some counselling studies. So I learned to be a counsellor, I learned to be a life coach. I wanted to study initially to help mum, But also what I realized when I started to do exercise, like active listening, I was like, this is incredibly useful for me as for myself, with my family, with my friends, with my partner, whoever. These are really, really interesting concepts. And so I started to learn more and more and more. So the 3 things that Carl Rogers said, this is what I really liked about him, that an individual needs for positive change to occur. So any individual, no matter what the circumstance is, no matter what they're going through, these are the 3 core components, okay? You need empathy. So empathy is one of those things. Does anyone know the difference between empathy and sympathy? So if our friend's fallen down into a hole, okay, and we look down and we go, oh, mate, that must be really tough down there, that's sympathy. I'm detached from it, yeah? Whereas empathy will be climbing down and saying, listen, I'm here with you. Maybe I can't even understand how this must feel for you, but I just want you to know that I'm here with you. Empathy is about the feeling. It's about connecting with the feeling, yeah? And that drives connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. That's a Brené Brown quote there, but another really good person to read into. Congruence, okay? Congruence is another word for being genuine. And that means being genuine with yourself. So when someone says how you're feeling, being congruent, and also for the other person to be able to do that with you. It's really important. There's a saying, honesty breeds honesty. If I come and every day I say, how are you doing? And you're not feeling great, you say, yeah, good. You're not creating an environment for, you may be feeling good and that's totally fine, but you're not creating a space to say, I'm actually asking you the question of how you're doing, and I'm actually want to know truthfully how you're feeling. And what you might find, I'll show you something a little bit later, it's called the triangle of trust. Those 3 people around you who you know that you can lean on, those 3 people that you can message at any point and say, hey, how's everyone doing? And actually they know, oh, he's asking how I'm doing. I have that now. I have little WhatsApp groups with friends. Who is that triangle of trust for you? Who is that community that you have that you know when they say how you're doing, they're really asking you how you're doing? And if you don't have that, it's a really good thing to think about now when maybe you're not in a crisis situation or your mental well-being is relatively stable or your mental health is relatively stable. Set those infrastructures now so that, hopefully not, but if things were to slip as they did for me, you've got the people in place, whereas I didn't know where to start. I didn't know where to turn. It was just very impulsive. And unconditional positive regard. This is something you learn as a therapist, but essentially what this says is no matter who you're speaking to and no matter what their situation is, see it from their point of view. See it from their situation. So different people have different stress tolerances, but we must try and see it from their point of view. So someone might say, for example, I've got this email inbox that just never ends. It's something that's quite common, actually, and it just stresses me out. It's just never ending. And other people will say, do you know what? I quite like my emails. I quite like just going through them systematically. Different people have a different way of engaging, and it's important where we can to have that unconditional positive regard for the situation of the person. The emails is a very light touch. It could be something much more serious than that, but it gives you an idea. So, what did I do? What did I do to get myself through? Created a little acronym. I like acronyms. I like visuals. So for me, it was a shed. I always went back. And I knew that every time that I wasn't feeling great, I would have neglected my shed. And I knew that every time I wasn't feeling great, I'd need to go back and repair my shed before engaging with the world. So the 4 points are sleep. Not always a luxury we're afforded. Some of you might have children, some of you might not. Some of you, working long hours, different shifts, etc., etc. Hydration, exercise, and diet. I'll come on to them a little bit more now. But I could almost guarantee that if my mental well-being was deteriorating, I would be neglecting one or all of these components, always. And funnily enough, how easy it would be to neglect all of these. So you have a stressful day at work, you go out, you have some beers after work. I'm just using what I would have done for an example. Go out and have some beer. I haven't really had dinner. I'm out late. I get back. I'm dehydrated. No water before bed. Maybe a McDonald's on the way home. Do you know what I mean? Something like that. So all of a sudden, my sleep's off. I'm dehydrated. Done no exercise for the day. I've been sat at a desk all day. And my diet, my nutrition's off as well. So all of a sudden, my shed's fallen apart. And that's in one day. How quickly it can happen. So just to give you an idea, 6.6 hours of sleep a night. I know sometimes you hear a lot. Some people say recommended 7 hours, 8 hours, 9 hours. Some people say 5 hours. Some people, you hear Jeff Bezos, he says 5 hours is more than enough. He said, I can't sleep more than that. everybody is individual. Everybody will have different capacities. Everybody needs a different amount of sleep. So try and find for yourself what that is. At the moment, I'm having about 5, 6 hours of sleep a night, but it's hot at the moment. But with the window open, when daylight comes up, I find that my body naturally just wakes up. There's no alarm clocks. I didn't have an alarm clock for this morning. And so my body's getting into a little bit of a cycle. I appreciate that might not always be the luxury you're afforded if you're working various shift patterns, but it's just to try and identify what is a good amount of sleep for me to have. Like, when am I really not performing and when am I really not functioning if it's below X? If I know that I'm getting 3 hours sleep, tomorrow's a write-off. And here's another thing that I want to put forward as an idea. So I studied quite a lot into this. We're talking about automatic negative thoughts again, those ants. Beware of the ants. If before you go to bed, you say to yourself, oh, I'm absolutely knackered. I'm going to be so exhausted tomorrow. Oh, it's going to be a long day. Why does this always happen? If you prime yourself like that before bed, that's how you'll wake up in the morning. Whereas if you prime yourself before you go to bed and say, I'm going to have 5 hours sleep. I've survived on 5 hours sleep before. Tomorrow's going to be a good day. It changes your psychology of how you wake up in the morning. Try it for yourself, yeah? Really makes a difference. If you're constantly having those negative thoughts, that's what your next day will become. Hydration. 5% drop in body fluids. Obviously, we know our body is made up of water. Can reduce concentration and performance by 30%. So stay hydrated, people. We can't lose, depending on what your role is as well, you can't really losing a third of your performance, cognitive function. So stay hydrated. Coffee is a diuretic. If you're drinking coffee, you're going to wee more. Try and drink more water. You know, have one coffee, have one water, whatever, but just be mindful of it. It makes such a difference. Exercise, you probably hear loads of recommendations on what we should. We might have mobility issues. We might have things that stop us from being able to do lots and lots of exercise. But I believe in everybody's day, there are small changes that you can put in for yourself. Is it the walk up the stairs? Is it the lift? Is it the walk through the park? There are things that we can all do in our own situations that keep our body moving a little bit more. If you find that you're in a role where you're sat down quite a lot, try and get up. They say every 30 minutes you should be getting up and having a little move. How often do we do that? I don't do that every 30 minutes. Sometimes I'm sat for 2.5 hours on a laptop. So just to be mindful, just to start to be mindful of these things, what's good for you. The Apple Watch, which I've got, it gives you like a little nudge on your wrist that says you need to stand up and go for a walk for a little bit or go and have 5 minutes. You know, these things are quite useful sometimes, but if not, have it for yourself. Try and pick yourselves a couple of times in the day where you might be able to. Or you might find you're on your feet too much and you need to sit down for 10 minutes. So make sure that you're making that time for yourselves as well. It could be the opposite. Low intensity exercise, so going for walks 30 to 35 minutes, 3 to 5 times a week. Good for cognitive functions, sleep, and stabilizing mood. And diet. You are what you eat. If you eat at McDonald's, well, I don't know. You know, I said that. I was actually considering it. I got back late last night on a flight, and McDonald's was the only place that was open, but I thought, nah, I can't do this. Like, literally practicing what I preach, you know. So I went back and had a banana, and that was fine. But yeah, some things that are very good for you. You may not be able to read these, so I'll read some of them for you that are here. So you've got avocados, blueberries. Blueberries are a big brain food. Broccoli, coconut oil, eggs, green leafy vegetables, salmon, turmeric, walnuts, dark chocolate. I also appreciate sometimes these things can be a little bit expensive. You know, you might not have the luxury to be able to go and buy all of these things. But just to be mindful of what you're eating. It's a funny world we live in that the cost of a salad can cost more than a burger. You know, as I said yesterday, I flew back from Spain, and it was very interesting, the amazing produce that they have. Like a tomato, I ate this tomato, and I was like, it has flavour. It's not this watery kind of Tesco's, whatever it is. It doesn't really taste of anything. But to get the good stuff here, it can be quite expensive. So how do we overcome that? How do we go about that? You know, got to get creative sometimes. So another talk that I do, the power of vulnerability, something I learned for myself. It's okay to not be okay. You've probably heard this, Slow. You've probably seen it, read it sometimes. Setting personal boundaries, so important. I didn't realize with Mum, I was so subservient. I was there for her. It's my mum. I wanted to protect her. I wanted to look after her. But I did that at the cost of my own well-being. And what then happened when I had that breakdown, I was unable to support her. So then on top of that, while I'm sitting with the cast on my foot, I'm feeling guilty because I'm like, you should be there for mum. You've fallen off your scooter. She's in hospital, this. That's not helping the situation as well. So what I did after this happened, and I didn't tell mum what had happened for a long time because I didn't want to unsettle her. She was not in a very stable place, and I didn't want to share my experience and then for her to feel bad. So I just kind of kept it to myself. But later, I was able to go and put boundaries and able to start talking about boundaries. You know the oxygen mask analogy? You know when you're on a plane, they say put your oxygen mask on first before you help other people. Why is that? Because if you don't put yours on first and you can't help yourself, then how are you going to help you know, if a plane went under or it became smoky, you've got to look after yourself first. Because like I said to you, if you're not going to look after yourself, no one else is. Yeah, we must put ourselves first. So I set boundaries, and I explained to mum why. I said, Mum, you know, I was getting calls at 3 a.m, Dan, I need money, I need this, you don't care about me, you're a terrible son. I know she didn't mean it, she wasn't very well, and I understand that now. But at the time, it's quite tough when you're working very hard, trying to support your family or trying to support your mum, and all you're getting is essentially emotional abuse. It's tough, it's very tough. But when she was calm and when things were level, I was able to say to her, Mum, I love you, I'm here for you. I just need a couple of days. I'm going through some things myself, but I will get back to you in a couple of days. And by setting that up, she knew that I was still there, that I still cared, but I was able to take that little bit of time for myself, help myself, and then come back to the situation and then help her. But now it's myself first before anyone and anything. And it should be like that. I believe so anyway. Okay, so depression, you know, I wanted to touch on a couple of little bits here. 2 weeks for diagnosis of clinical depression. I'm sure we've all experienced some form of low mood at some point. When I went to the GP initially, just to talk you through, and some of you may have experienced this yourself, they asked me to take a mood chart for a couple of weeks. So there are a couple of really cool apps that I'll show you at the end as well, which I found very useful for doing that. There's one called Dailyo, and actually you'd go in on every day and you'd put a little emoji to loosely chart how you're feeling. Is it a smile? Is it a wobbly face? Is it sad? And so what my GP said to me was, clinical depression will be diagnosed after 2 weeks of consistent low mood or whatever the symptoms are. But what I found is that I wasn't necessarily having 2 weeks of sustained. I would have like Monday might be good, Tuesday, Wednesday might be bad, Thursday might be a good day, Friday, however we describe those days. So what the GP then said was, focus on what you're doing on the good days and try and lift those. On the days that are making you feel elated, happy, whatever those feelings are, write them down. Write the things that you're doing on those days. And actually, when I did start to write those things down, what I realized was, you know, the Sunday blues. Why was I getting Sunday blues? Why did that happen? Oh, funnily enough, because Saturday night I was out with my friends, generally, most Saturdays. So again, my shed was a little bit off. I get to Sunday, I'm going, oh, my work's coming back up on Monday. Ugh. Now I'm getting anxious about Monday's work. So that for the diagnosis for depression, that's what the GP... it's changing a little bit now post-pandemic. I know friends and individuals that have gone to see the GP and they've said, look, I've been feeling like this already for 2 weeks. I don't, think I can go on feeling like this. Then they will suggest a course of action, which might be medication. It could be a number of things. It could be therapy, whatever that might be. But again, it's for each individual. I'm not for or against medication or for or against CBT and talking therapies. I think it is for each individual to find what works for them. And that was what it was for me. Because mum had been on a lot of medication for many, many years, I decided at that point I wanted almost in a way to find a more natural solution to get myself back on my feet. But that's not for everyone. I know I have very good friends that have been on medication for a while. It stabilized them and they're functioning and they're happy with what they're doing and that's working for them and that's totally fine. Can you read all that? Shall I read this to you quickly? I'm not sure. Depression is a common mental disorder that causes people to experience depressed mood, loss of interest, of pleasure, feeling, guilt or low self-worth, disturbed sleep or appetite, low energy and poor concentration. I'm sure at some point we've all experienced one or a few of those things, but it's just to let you know what the definition would be for that diagnosis. And if actually we do have some healthy habits and things that we're doing that are helping us, we try and build and develop on those where we can. So stress and anxiety. Again, for these, the signs and symptoms can actually be very similar. You've got faster heartbeats, you've got some symptoms here, faster heartbeat for both of them actually. Your breathing, you can have diarrhea, you can be anxious thoughts, mood, irritability, general unhappiness. What you'll find is a lot of these signs and symptoms can cross over to all of them. So at that point, it's not about necessarily trying to give a self-diagnosis, going, actually, I'm going to be congruent, I'm going to be true to myself, I'm feeling like this today, and therefore, what were my healthy habits? What were the things that I put in place that did make me feel good? I'm going to try and do some of those for the day. And I guarantee you, if you start your day off and you maybe not feeling too great, and you look after your shed, or whatever the things are for you, and you implement those things, you will feel better. You might not feel completely 100%, but you will feel better. And it's just keeping up those routines of things that are good for you yourself. Some levels of stress actually can be quite useful for us, actually, for an athlete. So what is stress? Does anyone know what stress is? Stress can be the body's response to a perceived threat. Yeah, so we become stressed. So actually, you might have heard of fight or flight. You might have heard of that terminology before. But actually, if you're an athlete and you are at the beginning of a race, that's going to be good for you. It's going to release everything you need. It's going to increase your performance. That little bit of stress, that little bit of anxiousness at the start of that race is going to make you perform better. Likewise, if you have a deadline to be in, you know, if you've ever had exams or courseworks or things you need to do and you do that kind of cramming just before, it's not necessarily the best way to do it, but you are in a heightened state for a while. Where it becomes unhealthy and detrimental is where there's no end to it. So the never-ending email inbox, for example, something where there is no perceived end to it. So we know as students or when we're studying, I've got an exam on the 27th of July or whatever the thing might be. So I know it might be a little bit stressful in the build up to that, but I know on the 27th of July that's done and I can go, ah. That's what we want to be mindful of. Is there an end to this? Is there an end date to this stress causing activity? So another acronym may be useful for you. What do we do if we want to support an individual? What was it when I was going to help my mum? What did I do? So a couple of acronyms that I put together myself just to remind myself. Actually, when I would sometimes get frustrated, or there was quite a bit of animosity, if I'm honest with myself. I was just like, Mum, you know, I've done everything I possibly can, and still you're giving me all this stress. And, but I would remind myself these little acronyms. So a life. So we approach the individual, we find an appropriate time and setting, okay, if we're worried about someone, and if we've made sure that we're in a right place, we're in a good place ourselves, yeah? We find an appropriate time and setting to approach the individual. Listening. It amazes me that we don't study more on listening when it's such a big component of our lives. You know, we spend so much time at school learning how to write. How often do you write? How often do any of us write letters? Probably write emails, probably write text messages, write WhatsApps, but we don't fully write, and that is such a big amount of our study at school, whereas actually listening, we probably spend about, how many of you have had any formal listening training, depending on your roles? Probably not very many, or not very much. I certainly hadn't. But how much of our day is spent listening? How much power and value is there to gain from actually fully listening to someone and being fully present? It's incredible. That's why I did the coaching course and the counselling, to learn this. We want to avoid judgment or fixing, so non-judgmental listening. Quite often with myself and my sisters, if my sister would come to me and say, oh, I've punctured the wheel on my bike, I'd be like, no problem, I'll take it to Halfords, I'll go and get another one. I didn't even check with her if she wants another wheel. She might actually hate riding. I didn't ask her what was important to her, I just put my solution onto it. Because, why? Because it was the fastest way to get resolution and move on. So sometimes it's good to say, what can I do for you, to an individual? How can I help you? Open question. What can I do to make your situation a little bit better? Yeah? Not fix. Unless an individual says to you, I'm feeling like this, I have absolutely no idea what to do. Okay, let's look together. Let's check out a couple of sites. Let's look at a few tools that Danny's going to give us at the end of this session. Inform, reassure that support is available. There's plenty of support out there. And you know, I'm in admiration of the NHS and the work that's done. Really, I am. And I know that at times when in particular that evening when I was taken to hospital, I remember a nurse saying to me, I was white, I was in shock, I was not in a good place. And I remember her, she was an Irish nurse, and she said to me, "Don't worry, love, you're not the first person to go through this, and you won't be the last." And it stopped me from feeling strange, stopped me from feeling weird. I felt like a failure, I felt like an idiot, like, why did I do this to myself? I've let everyone down. And she just made me feel normal, and she calmed me, and she reassured me. She just listened, and she reassured me, and that was so powerful for me. It doesn't cost anything, it just costs time. Find professional help and encourage further support. So there's one acronym there. You'll be able to pause this, those that are watching later. So becoming an active listener. If you become interested in this, and I think depending on your role, I think there's management training around this. There's so much around active listening and the power and the value of it. People win jobs. People win $1 million contracts because they listen first. What is it? Seek to understand before being understood. Yeah? Really powerful. So pay attention. Non-judgmental listening. Be patient. Sometimes if we're sitting there and someone comes in and they're sharing a story with us, we get distracted. Our mind wanders. Just try and come back. Focus on the present. It can be difficult sometimes, I know that. Sometimes when people are speaking to me, I get distracted, my concentration goes. How do we do that? A simple way is just to come back to your breath, come back to your breathing for a second. Focus on, this is a little bit of a strange one, but if you're sat down, you feel yourself going into your head and outside the room, come back to something in the present. So you can squeeze your leg, you can squeeze your toes into your shoes, you can do something. Sometimes you do this. If I'm delivering a big talk and there's a lot of people and I get nervous and sometimes it's rattly, I'll squeeze my finger. No one will notice it, but I can just squeeze and I put the tension in here, and you don't see it. It doesn't start coming out in my voice because the tension is down here. So a very simple little technique. Body language, open body language. If I'm standing here and it's closed off, what does that tell you? What does that tell you? What is this telling you? So how do we present ourselves? Are we ready to take on that information when we say, "How are you doing?" Restating is a good technique. So reflect back what the person has said. "Oh, you mentioned that you went for a walk today with your dog. How was that?" Shows the person that you're listening and you're engaged. Oxygen mask I mentioned. You can't pour from an empty cup. Stuff that I mentioned in the beginning. I learned this the hard way, but it's essential really. So the left one, for those of you who might not be able to read it, it says, "You can't pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself first." And the right-hand side, not necessarily the book, but your oxygen mask first. Look after yourself first. Put yourself first. Think of 3 people. Check they are happy to be a part of your group or have the capacity to do so. And check in with each other. How are you doing? How's everyone doing this week? How's everyone doing this night? Set it up early to say that if I ever come in this group and I say, "Listen, it's not a good day, it's because I'm in a really bad way," whatever the truth is of your situation, be congruent, be honest, set the parameters of what that group is, and you all know how to respond and support each other. So this is Mum. Now, the journey does continue. This is Sky. This is actually the little one who you saw next to me in the very early picture. And I put here the journey continues because it's not done. It's not a light switch. It's not a tick box. It's not you come to a seminar and you hear a little bit of my story and it's just done and it's ongoing. It's a moving feast. Mum, touch wood, has been in a very good place for a year, but I'm very mindful that it might not be the case next week. But what do? Is we have the infrastructure in place as a family to be like, what support does Mum need? What worked for her last time? Most importantly, we asked her what she wanted. You probably hear this saying, you can lead a horse to water. For so long, I was trying to say to her, "Mum, go and see this person, go and see that person." And she didn't want to see any of them. And as soon as I stepped back and I said, "Mum, I love you, I'm here for you. You just let me know what you need and when you're ready to." She went to go and started seeing that therapist anyway, herself. And I was just like, I've been trying to say this for so long. But, sometimes people need the space themselves to be able to find what their solution or their resolution is for something. Tussle, another little acronym. So talking, understanding, the supporting, the reassurance, the signposting, listening, engaging. This for me reflected my tussle with Mum. It was my tussle of like my obligation as a son, but actually it wasn't serving me, it wasn't helping me. There was a lot of emotional abuse. There was a lot that got me quite down, actually, but I don't blame her for any of it now. I just realized that it's a byproduct of her illness. But yeah, that for me was, again, I had to keep reminding myself, it's a tussle, because that's what I say, it's a tussle, Danny, it's a tussle, and you're going through this. So what do I need to do? I need to just talk, I need to be understanding, I need to make sure that she knows there's extra support, I need to be listening, and these were like a little mantra, and it would take me from being angry to understanding, to showing more compassion, more empathy. Again, you notice I didn't even know that I did that, but angry, I was up here, to understanding, and I went down, head and body, feeling. So, some cool apps here. I hope you can see them a little bit clearer. As I mentioned, Dailyo, I'm pretty sure all of these on here are free. I'm not endorsed by any of them, but there's some really cool. You've got artificial intelligence, top right. So Wobot, Youper. Sometimes people don't want to speak to people on the phone, or they don't want to access those services. So you've now got these artificial intelligence bots that will have these conversations, but not like, how you doing? Yeah, good, thanks. Like asking a lot of really interesting open questions to stimulate your thinking about how you are actually feeling. I like technology, and I like how things are evolving generally in that way. Dailyo is thought tracking. So this is the one that I use, where I put that emoji on a Monday or a Tuesday or Wednesday, and then started to look at my chart for the month and be like, okay, every Sunday I'm feeling like this, every Wednesday I'm feeling like this. What am I doing on Tuesdays and Saturday nights, or what's my shift pattern, or what's happening, to try and stimulate that greater awareness. And then top left, you've got Headspace. Calm is probably another one. You're probably seeing this a lot more. When I create this presentation, Jake Mills is another one of the Speakers Collective, who I do my speaking. He created this. He was so fed up of going online and trying to access support and not having a centralized space and putting in, I think I'm depressed, and it sends you all over the place. He created this central hub of hope. It's a free app. They're making a version for kids as well, where you put in your postcode and it shows you all the local resource available to you. They could be free services, they could be therapists, it could be anything. It's a really, really incredible tool. And now you're starting to see it rolled out. I think they've just done a partnership with Mental Health MHFA UK. You're starting to see it at train stations. I saw a big advert for it at Euston. Really, really cool. And again, this is a really nice one if you have friends or family that might be in a difficult situation and they don't know where to turn and they're not really sure where the support is. You could just say, listen, I heard about this really cool app called Hub of Hope. Just try and download it, see if there's anything of value in there. There's tons of stuff in there. So yeah, it's a nice little starting point. And then we've got our mindfulness and meditation apps. I try and do this. Calm, for example, do something called the Daily Calm. It doesn't have to be through there. It's just the app that I know. And it takes you through a 10-minute guided meditation every day, but with a different theme. It might be kindness, forgiveness, love, compassion, anything, whatever it might be. But I find that really, really useful. And quite often when I'm very stressed, or I have something important coming up, or if I've had a meeting or something that's happened with my family, or something that's not gone very well and I'm not feeling great, and I've now in half an hour time got something else that I need to be, another delivery like this where I need to be sort of parking that for a little bit, I go and put this in for 10 minutes. It just resets me, gets you focusing on your breathing, lower your blood pressure, try calm yourself, and then ability to move forward. If you could implement that and do one of those in a day for 10 minutes, you'll notice such a difference in your mind, your mood, your cognitive function. So powerful. So just think of something for today that you'll take away. One thing, write it down. Whether that be for yourself, one thing that you've taken from everything that I've shared for you, but have one key takeaway, one key action point that you're going to implement, so that it doesn't become that you walk out and you just forget it all. Try and find something for yourself. You've got pen and paper. Think of something for yourself that you're going to take away. Your biggest takeaway from today, the biggest thing that you learn, and the one thing that you're going to try and implement for yourself or for others. Just take a second. Thank you so much for listening, being very patient through all of this. I've certainly enjoyed hearing your experiences, and thank you for the participation. And if you've got any questions, I'll be here at the end. I'll hang around for 10 or 15 minutes or so. But otherwise, thank you.